Do you want to learn the tricks that top leaders use to get the most out of themselves and their teams? Well, Naftali Hoff is here to help. Lead to succeed. Picks the brains of top leaders to learn about their challenges, insights, and best practices. Here's Naftali.
Hello, Lead to Succeed Nation. It's Naftali Hoff, and welcome to Lead to Succeed, episode 156. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Rabbi Daniel Lapin. Daniel Lapin, known widely as America's Rabbi, is a noted rabbinic scholar, best-selling author, and TV host. He is president of the American Alliance of Jews and Christians, author of America's Real War, Thou Shalt Prosper, and other bestsellers. A frequent guest on Fox News, WallBuilders Radio, and Glenn Beck TV, he hosts his own popular radio and podcast programs with audiences worldwide. Pairing his inheritance as a descendant of a multi-generational rabbinical family with his background of science and business, he teaches ancient Jewish wisdom in an unparalleled manner. Daniel, so glad to have you on the show today.
Good to be with you, Naftali. This is a great pre-weekend pleasure. I'm delighted.
Likewise. And unfortunately, as people probably could pick up, I'm still on the back end of a cold, but I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation. I would say podcast host to podcast host and rabbi to rabbi. So I'm looking forward to that, but I'm not going to make this a rabbinic conversation first and foremost. This is, after all, a leadership podcast. So we are going to focus our attention over there. But before we go any further, why don't you tell us a little bit more? It's a fascinating bio, but tell us your version of it. What's your story? How did you get here?
I studied with, I'll say that when I was a child and growing up in the home of a rabbinic family, I knew from the very start, Naftali, from the youngest age, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that when I grew up, the absolutely one thing I would never be is a rabbi. And it was, but when the good Lord has plans for you and you ignore them, you tend to get whacked. So I got whacked a few times till I realized where my destiny lay, and that's what happened. I came to the United States for a short 3-week visit, and illegal immigrants are here to do the work Americans aren't willing to do, and so, being an Orthodox Jewish rabbi who is very fond of Christians, I figured there was work for me. There weren't a lot of people in that niche when I arrived, and then as I was giving lectures and speeches around the country, I discovered that there was a question that people, when they felt comfortable with me, asked me more than any other, and that was, why are Jews disproportionately good with money? I mean, after all, the Forbes 400 list, given that we Jews are about 1.5% of the population, we should be about 6 or 7 Jews. We're never less than 60 and usually closer to 100. So wildly disproportionate. And I thought, what a good question that is, And I jumped to some of the quick conclusions that people will always tell you about this. One was that, again, if I sound mocking, it is because I am trying to mock it. There are some very, very stupid explanations for this, but at the time, people were taking them seriously. For instance, the Cossacks killed all the poor Jews, and so the rich ones got away to breed, as if there was some sort of money gene in sperm that allows Jews to reproduce monetary success. It just doesn't work that way. That's complete nonsense. And then I was always, well, it's a question of intelligence. Jews are very intelligent. Well, I discovered that the most intelligent people in America are working on the faculties of major universities. And anybody in the financial services industries like you and I, we know that there is nobody worse with money than academics. There is nothing worse. So it clearly had nothing to do with wealth. And also, when one notices that the most successful people financially in the United States of America are right there in the middle of the bell curve distribution. Admittedly, super dumb people are not going to make a lot of money. But here was the fascinating thing my research yielded, and I did 10 years of work on this. Too smart, and you don't succeed financially either. Because you succeed by doing transactions with people voluntarily, consensually, and willingly. And people tend to do transactions with people whom they know and people they like and whom they trust. And the trouble with people who are super high intelligent is you never feel completely comfortable with them. They always, you feel there's a hidden agenda you'll never understand, something going on behind the scenes. Whereas the way God designed human economic interaction is a system of complete transparency and openness. If you and I agree to do business together, there's nothing that I need to withhold from you or should withhold from you. And so discovering all this, I decided a book was in order, and I wrote Thou Shalt Prosper, which became an international bestseller. The book did very, very well indeed, and continues to do very well indeed, having sort of put a number of young Lapins through college and doing just fine. The book itself was called Thou Shalt Prosper, although I originally wanted to call it God's Plan for Human Financial Success. The publisher didn't want anything about religion or God in it, and so and they also edited a number of aspects of it out. And then after the book did so well, they came and said, could we do another one? This time including all the stuff that didn't make it into the first. And so this we called Business Secrets from the Bible. By this point, there was no concern about trying to conceal or camouflage my background and the source of the information I was teaching. And that's what happened, Naftali. At the end, it became clear that Jewish financial success had nothing to do with intelligence. It had nothing to do with chicken soup. It had nothing to do with being circumcised, which is good because most people would prefer poverty. And the answer really was that the entire body of Jewish wisdom, what we call the Torah, along with all its associated transmissions, actually contain everything one needs to know about how the world really works. And I think that is the crucial thing. How the world really works has really become it's the slogan on my show. It's if I speak in synagogues or in churches or for business groups, it's always a case of let's find out how the world really works. And it's remarkable just how few people actually know how the world really works.
Wow. Okay. So time to unpack a little bit. Yeah. Now, in full disclosure, as I think we talked about before we started recording, as much as I love to talk shop with fellow Jews and kind of behind the scenes of community life and what makes us unique and all of that good stuff. Obviously, this is a leadership podcast first and foremost. The audience, everybody who's listening, is a broad range of people from all different corners of the world, let's say. So what I am interested in what you were sharing specifically to, relevant to our discussion, the podcast, the audience, has to do with this piece on transactions, this idea of transparency. Because I think that, I've written books too. I've not had the same success that you've had, but thank God I've had success as well. My first book, Becoming the New Boss, was designed to help new leaders be successful. And it's built off of my experience as a new head of school. But of course, it doesn't follow my story per se as much as it really breaks down all the things that new leaders need to know. And what I learned as I was writing the book, interestingly, just as an aside, for those who are interested in becoming more productive, the book that I wrote, I don't know what your style is in writing a book. For me, it was basically a slew of independent blog posts that eventually became a book. That I found enough, I had an idea of where I wanted to go with my writing. There was enough consistency. I filled in the gaps as appropriate. And eventually I produced a book that allowed me to produce regular content. It created these deadlines in my mind. And so I was able to consistently work towards something short-term as well as long-term. Have, the short-term benefit of the blog post, the feedback, the interaction, the engagement, and then the longer-term benefit of the book, and be able to utilize that in different ways. But what I was getting at is that so much of leadership, and new leaders often don't realize this, is about relationships. It's not about what you know. That used to be relevant when you were looking to be promoted. But now that you've been promoted, it's less about your knowledge. It's more about your ability to develop a vision, share the vision, interact with other people, communicate effectively, what we call soft skills, right? The transferable skills. So speak to us more, please. You talked about in the context, if I understood it correctly, of Jewish business. And so I'm assuming what you meant was that within the Jewish community, there's a lot of interconnectivity, a lot of trust. People are looking out for each other. This is how I interpreted your message. And I see that people talk at synagogue, they talk at other places where there are concentric circles and we interact often. So naturally, I help you, you help me. What do you have going on? Let's do this together. There's a sense of community. How does this relate to either take us to a corporate setting, take us maybe to a nonprofit setting where a leader wants to get better? They want to learn how to leverage these pieces. How do I become, first of all, why is it so important for regular leaders to do this? And number two, what are some tips you would share that help people become better in these areas?
I think my starting point is that it's not only about connections. I very much agree with you that it's not who you know or what you know, but I'll tell you what I think it is, and that is it's what you are. And so business and leadership in general doesn't allow for any faking. It's incredibly intolerant of inauthenticity. And it's something that people pick up very quickly. The military is very aware of this, and the whole promotional process in the military is designed to overcome this problem that a faker is incredibly destructive, because it's not possible to fake leadership for very long. So the question very much then is not how do you acquire the language of leadership, or how do you acquire the appearance of leadership, but it is a case of how do you actually become a leader.
Yes.
The second thing is that it's not at all only about the case of who you know. It's also about your fundamental outlook. And I'm talking primarily about leadership in a business setting, either in an entrepreneurial, small to mid-size operation, as well as in a corporate setting. And one of the fundamental principles that emerges from what I call ancient Jewish wisdom, I use that, and it's my sort of trademark nomenclature for what is otherwise a confusing and vast body of 2,000 or longer worth of traditional Jewish thought. And included in that is this idea that nobody can truly succeed at anything that they consider to be morally reprehensible in their hearts. And so if you're not convinced of the virtue of what you do, you're simply not going to succeed at it unless you are utterly and completely amoral. And there are actually not that many people like that. And most of them that are like that are either in politics or in jail. But most people are alert to what their souls tell them is the value or the virtue of what they're engaged in. And why this is so important is because rooted in our culture, and we do imbibe this from the culture around us, having a lot of money is evidence of malpractice. Having a lot of money means you're not a good person. And making money is an expression of nothing but your venality and your greed. And so to overcome this idea and to absorb the fundamental principle that making money is God's system of institutionalized goodness. It is what incentivizes me to take care of the needs of other people. Absorbing that is hugely important. And I'll just give you one example that I'm sure will resonate with you. I'm sure you've had clients who are in this situation. And that is people who have difficulty submitting a bill. People who have trouble explaining how much you owe me. I've done the work. This is how much, or here's what my proposal, and there's an awkwardness, there's a discomfort of articulating the amount.
Yeah.
And that's because of a misunderstanding of this idea of money, and the idea that we don't make money but take it, and that every time I get paid by you, I get money and you lose it. And there is, and again, we don't teach economics. We don't teach it in yeshiva. We certainly don't teach it in school. And unless you go to graduate school, you really aren't going to know very much about how money actually works. So if the entire enterprise in your mind, deep in your heart, is shrouded with a veil of vice, or a veil of lack of veracity, that somehow being in the business world is a distraction from being a really good person. Now, I won't dispute that the moral challenges facing somebody who has a few dollars are more than the moral challenges facing somebody who has nothing, simply because one has more choices. But I think that's an important thing, I think, for anyone in leadership, not only to understand, but to really wrap his soul around, so that the person really understands that the enterprise of which he is a leader is an enterprise engaged in virtue.
Yeah.
Unless you're a leader.
If I could pick up on that for just a moment.
Of course.
I attended a lecture the other night, and there was a rabbi presenting the content. And it happened to be for Jewish business owners or business professionals in my community. And because of the fact that we're recording this in the days leading up to Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish high holidays, so repentance is top of mind for people. The idea of becoming better is top of mind for people. And, again, your issue that you're raising, which is not just a Jewish issue, certainly in the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's very prominent. I can't speak to other cultures, but I would imagine it's relevant to all sorts of cultures and religions and whatnot, that money is dirty, and that people who are pursuing money or the financial pieces of it are in some way engaged in the wrong things, and everybody should be sitting and studying, or whatever it might look like. So we have this concept in our tradition that if I make a blessing, if I have the right intent before I pursue something that seems to be intrinsically secular, let's call it, or physical in nature, materialistic, and that would be anything from consuming food, exercising, going to work. If I put the intention there that by going to work, let's use this example because this is obviously our focus in the conversation. If by going to work, I am thinking about, I'm able to sustain my family, I'm able to pay tuition for my children's education, I'm able to provide charity, tzedakah, to organizations in my community and elsewhere that need it. So I have now elevated what would otherwise be viewed as the mundane task of going to work and earning a paycheck or leading a company and making revenue, whatever that looks like, into something godly and into something spiritual, because I've reframed it from I need to live in order to eat, but rather, I need to work in order to eat and all of that, to I need to work in order to fulfill my purpose. And that work is part of our purpose. It's not separate from it. It's not like, here's my purpose over here in the synagogue, the church, the place of worship, outside of work, and work is this totally other thing. Work is part of the totality of my existence. I just need to make sure that I'm mindful of it and that utilize my religious and moral and ethical values in the workplace the same way that I would use it outside the workplace, and not to bifurcate the two and say work is work and church or synagogue is synagogue, and that's the end of it, and I'm going to live these two disparate lives.
Naftali, can I be obnoxious?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
I have to I have to disagree with you, and
okay.
I have considerable respect and admiration for you, for what you've built and for the work you do. So it's only with great trepidation that I embark on this treacherous passage here. But I don't agree with you at all that we elevate work by using the proceeds to take care of our family and to give charity. Because the work then is only a means to the end, and the end is to get money. So it's essentially a selfish occupation. And you don't greatly diminish the selfishness by giving charity or by taking care of your family, because those are the things you choose to do with your money. And the guy who chooses to buy a Ferrari does what he chooses to do with his money. But you both share a common feature, which is that you're both working as a means to the end, and the end is getting money. So it's essentially a selfish occupation, and that is partially what contributes to some of the moral ambiguity within our hearts and within our minds. The thought that, well, this is essentially selfish. If I worked in a nonprofit, that would be much more valuable because I wouldn't be getting paid for it. That would show that I'm of a true heart. And I would like to combat that and say that I think that is intrinsically a flawed direction to follow, and it's one that inevitably will impose severe handicaps on your potential in leadership and making money. And most of the seminars I do, most of the coaching that I do is geared to understanding and absorbing really into your being the intrinsic morality of working. So in other words, if you had a trust fund and you had all the money you needed from your, I'm not saying this is what you would do because I suspect it isn't, but talking theoretically in terms of the avenue that you described, at that point, one would stop working, because since the whole reason for working was as a means to an end, to have the money to give to charity and to support your family, now that you're suddenly the beneficiary of a trust fund, hey, no problem, end of work. But that's clearly not part of God's plan, because God's plan isn't that ideally we should have a 7-day Sabbath. It's that we should have a 1-day Sabbath, but the preceding statement is 6 days you shall work. Well, hey, God, what if I don't have to? I suddenly married a descendant of the Rockefeller family and I don't have to work ever again. Apparently you still have to. Why? And so work is not a means to an end. Work is being obsessively preoccupied with the needs and the desires of God's other children, to put it that way. In other words, the reason I work, and I've spent a lot of time trying to drum this into me and to wrap myself around it and to make it a part of my living soul, and I'm not there yet, but I've made good progress, and that is I work because of what we call in Hebrew ahavat habriot. I want to help other people. Now, most of them are my customers. I'm a plumber, and I really get a kick when the phone rings and somebody says, "Hey, my wife's upset. There's a faucet in the kitchen that won't stop running." I'm in my truck in seconds, and I'm going to be there, and I'm going to fix that up really quickly. And I might even take my children along as a living lesson that they can see my eagerness to help another human being. And at the end of it, the person who calls me is going to say, "How much do I owe you?" And I will say to him, "Well, I would like 150 certificates of performance." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, you know those green strips of paper with pictures of presidents on them? And what they prove is that I served you, and I want 150 certificates of performance." And he laughs and he, "Okay, I get it." And he gives me $150. And then that evening, I tell my wife, we've got to go off and get dinner. Let's find ourselves a nice kosher restaurant. I'd love us to get some steaks and fries. And we find a restaurant. We walk in, and the proprietor says, "What do you want?" And I say, "Well, we'd actually like 2 large steaks and 2 plates of fries." He says, "You expect me to stand over my hot stove just because you want steaks and fries?" And I say, "Well, I saw it says restaurant up there." And he says, "Yes, but that's a restaurant. It's only for members of the club." I said, "What, is this a private restaurant?" He says, "In a way, it's private for all people who are devoted to serving other people." And I said, "Oh, I get it. No problem. I actually served somebody else this afternoon. I repaired somebody's faucet." He said, "Can you prove it?" I say, "Sure." And I pull out a wad of certificates of performance. He says, "No problem. Please sit down, make yourselves comfortable. I'm going to bring you a terrific meal." After the meal, I say to him, "And how many certificates of performance do I have to give you?" And he said, "Well, I'd like 90 certificates of performance." I say, "Fine, here you go." So that's how it works. And it's hugely different, because when we don't work for money, we're not looking for money. We're looking for opportunities to serve other people. We're looking for people who can use our goods or our services. The money will flow by itself. And so you'll pardon me, but I really wanted to just make that clear, because that's an essential part of everything I write and everything I teach. It's an essential part of success, in that you are able to be filled with a deep sense of fulfillment because of the idea that you're serving other people.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you elaborating there. I do not question. Look, as I tell people all the time, if I was blessed to a point where I did not need to work, I would continue personally to do so, because of the fact that through my work as an educator and now as a coach, do believe very much in a life of service. That said, we could probably, unpack this conversation in greater detail. However, in the interest of time, and because you have so much else to talk about, or we have so much else we could potentially talk about, I'd like to hit on 1 or 2 things additionally before we move into our rapid fire, if we can. So one question I have for you is, what are some core principles from Jewish wisdom? You might have hit on this already, actually, but let's ask it anyway. Maybe there'll be something new you'd like to share. What are some core principles from Jewish wisdom that you believe are most relevant to modern society, and particularly in business and leadership?
Yeah. The English poet John Milton wrote one of the best perushim, one of the best explanations of the first few chapters of Genesis. He called it Paradise Lost. And it's quite wonderful. And I mentioned that just in passing, because John Milton I think he had a personal relationship with Oliver Cromwell, who led the English Revolution in the middle of the 17th century. And what he said, Oliver Cromwell was a soldier, and he said Oliver Cromwell was a leader long before he reached the battlefield. He had mastered leadership of himself. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't have John Milton's beautiful language at my fingertips, but he said by the time he got to the battlefield, he was already a leader, because he had mastered leadership over himself. And that's, again, a fundamental. It's something that you and I both grew up with, and you and I both teach our clients all the time, which is that self-discipline and self-mastery, leadership over oneself, the ability to conquer one's own inclinations, and to be able to reach a point where you do not what you want, not what you feel like, but you do what you need to do, and you do it when you need to do it. That, for a start, makes you an effective leader. And so one of the very first steps in generating leadership is mastering self-discipline. It's really a hopeless cause trying to be an effective leader if you haven't yet learned to master yourself.
Absolutely.
And it's in reality, and it's also in PR. In other words, if those you lead see you eat in a way that is uncontrolled, unrestrained, you will cost yourself valuable points in the leadership dynamic. So that would be one very important thing, that those who hope to lead need to work on enhancing and improving and increasing dramatically their own self-discipline. And there are 100 different exercises and ways we use to help people do that, but that is hugely important.
So let's talk about your book, Thou Shalt Prosper, which you referenced before. And you talked about, it outlines principles for financial success. And I'm curious to know, what would you say is one of the most common mistakes people make other than assuming that successful financial people are just smart people, other than that, which you talked about before? Practically, what would you say is one of the most common financial mistakes people make, and how do you advise them to fix it?
That's a very difficult question to answer, Naftali, because the world of business is so exciting, partially because it's limitless and vast. The variety of mistakes is almost without limit. A common mistake, perhaps one of them is not having an elevator statement, not having clarity in terms of how you serve other people. And so here I'm talking more about the entrepreneur. I'm talking about, me, the plumber, of a few minutes ago in the conversation. And we notice that in Jewish history, it's fascinating to note how many Jewish last names were indicative of occupation. Mm-hmm. And that was really important. And, Drucker, the printer, Waterman, the water, goldsmith, silversmith, it was without limit. All these names, and this spread. I mean, the English also, the word smith, a very popular word in England, was again somebody who was hugely important, and he took care of your horses. He'd shoe your horses, or he might have been an ironsmith. He might have made iron objects. So in the early days leading up to the Industrial Revolution in England, Smith was anyway. My point is that having a name that signifies what you do is like walking around with a big business card right on your forehead. Now, I'm not suggesting anybody should go through a name change procedure for that purpose, but I am saying that there are people who try and do what you warned against in an earlier part of our conversation when you spoke about bifurcating parts of our lives. And my newest book is The Holistic You, integrating the 5 crucial aspects of your life: your financial life, your family life, your fitness, your physical life, your friendship, your social life, and of course, your faith life. And what's so important here is for people to feel integrated in their lives. So if you are, if you are a, whatever you are, right, you're going back to a plumber, but somehow you're embarrassed by that because you'd really rather be a school teacher or a university professor, you're never going to really make it because you're not comfortable talking to people about what you do. There is a reason, for my audience tends to be reasonably comfortable with the Bible. They may not be religious, they may not be Jewish, but my audience, I hope your audience is okay if I say that when Joseph introduced his brothers to Pharaoh at the end of the book of Genesis, he said to them, listen, when you meet Pharaoh, the first thing he's probably going to say to you is, Ma ma'asechem, what do you guys do? And sure enough, he brings them before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's first thing, he meets the brothers and he says, what do you guys do? Isn't this exactly what we say to somebody we're sitting next to on an airplane, on a cross-country flight, and you chat for a few minutes? After a while, you say, so what do you do?
Right.
And we might even say, what field are you in? Which is, again, a biblical nomenclature there, because field is, in Bible terms, means you're living. So that's how it sprang the gap to English. But if you're not, we want to hear about people's business life. It tells us a huge amount. If somebody wants to date my daughter, which somebody did, one of my very first questions is, so what do you do? And I'll give a tip to all future fathers-in-law. If the young man begins his response with the word, well, it means he's unemployed. Because most of us are really comfortable talking about what we do. In fact, we love talking about what we do. And that's one of the reasons that in these interviews, you always find the most remarkable thing. It's a magazine interview, it's whatever it is, and they talk to somebody who's been, he's been a plumber. And they said to him, if you could do it all over again, would you be something else? The overwhelming majority of these interviews have the person saying, no, I love plumbing. I would do exactly the same thing again. Most of them. Why? Because when you become good at something, and you become good at something by doing it repetitively, you become a professional. They say 10,000 hours at something, and you are a professional at it. And that means people like it. And if you, and I tell this to everybody listening, take this to heart. If you do not like talking about your business, what you do for your work, if you don't like talking about it, you got a problem. You may be in the wrong field, or maybe you need help. You need Naftali to coach you to help you feel more comfortable about what you do. But if you don't love talking about what you do, it's not great.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. All right, so let's end the segment with the question that I think is very powerful for all my guests, but I think, I'm sure you'll have something special for us. And that is, what was the biggest mistake that you've made in your professional career that has positioned you or set you up for greater success?
Oh my goodness. This, not only we are only a few days in advance of the Jewish New Year, the Rosh Hashanah, and we're 10 days more in advance of the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and it's a time of introspection, and it's a very painful time. I'm not the only one who feels uncomfortable, confronting errors and mistakes, for we all have made them, and you ask for the one that has been most effective in positioning me for success. Well, I mentioned one to you, but while we were chatting earlier, just in conversation, it came up before we went on the air, before we went live, and that is that I didn't want to be a rabbi. Now, I didn't realize, there's a reason that so many movie stars have parents who are movie stars. And there's a reason why a disproportionate number of lawyers and doctors and dentists and accountants have parents who are in those, because you learn it with your mother's milk. You pick it up. You feel comfortable about it. It makes perfect sense. It's one of the reasons that justifies monarchy as a form of government, because there is something about growing up with it. So it would have been the most logical and natural thing for me to be a rabbi, as I have now discovered. But in my teen years, although my father wanted me to qualify as a rabbi and to study and to be credentialed as a rabbi, he accepted that I never actually wanted to be one. So I certainly enjoyed the material, I enjoyed mastering it, but I absolutely never wanted to serve as a rabbi. And so I became an electrical engineer. And that turned out to be a big mistake, because I discovered that as an electrical engineer, what I was mostly working with was things, not people. And I do better working with people. I like being with people. So that was a mistake. And little by little, I realized I then studied business and went into business. And then I was in California, and I met a group of remarkable young Jews who were completely secular, had no relationship with God, knew nothing about scripture. And I found that I was enjoying teaching them. So my leisure time was devoted to teaching them. And I was working for Merrill Lynch at the time. And so I was at my desk on the West Coast at 4 a.m. to be ready for the stock market opening in New York. And it was hard to find the time, but I did. And I started teaching these folks. And it ended up a few years later, we actually started a congregation that today remains a thriving congregation. It's called Pacific Jewish Center on the boardwalk in Venice, California. And I'd say my biggest mistake was resisting my destiny. I should have realized what I was put in the world for. I had plenty clues. And the good Lord whacked me a couple of times also to help me see the truth. And my life really took off once I acknowledged that, you know what, forget the stock market, back to where I should be.
There's a part of your story, thank you for sharing that resonates with me personally as well. I actually had full intent to be a lawyer. But as my yeshiva years extended beyond my initial plan, I found myself in small teaching settings, and then eventually decided I was going to pursue a field of education and eventual service in different ways. Never quite as lucrative as your average lawyer, but at the same time, from a service standpoint, from a fulfillment standpoint, it created great opportunities. So very, very thankful for that. Let me ask you, let's transition now, if we can, to rapid fire. So the answers are short and sweet. And
I don't
let's
do
see
short.
Okay, well, we're going to try. I'll try to help you out here. Here we go. A cool guest you've had on your TV show. I'm sure you've had many.
The coolest guest.
A cool guest.
I don't do guests. I so cherish my time with my audience. It's very unusual for me to do a guest. Very
unusual. Yourself. So you are the coolest guest you've ever had on your show.
Without wanting to promote or escalate obnoxiousness to new levels. But I enjoy the teaching, and that's what I do on my show. So I don't do guests.
Okay. So clearly I didn't do my homework. All right. My apologies. Let's move on to the next one.
No problem at all.
Something you do to unwind.
Sorry?
Something you do to unwind.
Oh, that's easy. I'm a boater. And since my children were born, we'd spend the summer exploring the bays and inlets and islands of British Columbia off the west coast of Canada. That's what we do. So I'm good the whole year round. Just give me Shabbat. Give me one day off every 7. Give me Jewish holidays, biblical festivals as they come, and I'll keep working year round until the summer comes and we load our boat in British Columbia and spend the next 5 weeks on the water. So that wow. For me is, I come back literally years knocked off me.
A great getaway not far from your home.
No, it's very far. I'm on the East Coast. I used to be in Seattle. We used to live on an island near Seattle, so that made it very easy. Now it's a cross-country trip to do it, but we still do it.
2 principles for financial success. Just the principles.
Don't give too much away for free.
Okay.
And in my book, Thou Shalt Prosper, I provide 10 commandments for success, not just 2, 10. And
this is rapid fire, so we're only asking for 2. Okay, we'll go to the book then. Let's move on to the next one.
Here's the one I gave you, and it is to begin to understand the extent to which the culture indoctrinates you to believe that becoming wealthy is evidence of malpractice. And you just think of words, Naftali, stinking rich.
Mm-hmm.
Having had my tough times, I can tell you it's really stinking to be poor, not rich.
Yeah, agreed.
But that's the phrase they use. Or even worse, you hear people talking about philanthropists. Isn't it wonderful to see him giving back to society? That's evil. Because if giving charity is giving back to society, what were you doing to society while you were making your money in the first place? Ripping it off. And that's what people believe.
A biblical verse, a rabbinic dictum everyone should know.
Who is strong and mighty? He who can conquer his own wish, his own feelings.
Something we should do each day to improve our relationships.
Kiss your wife and thank her for marrying you.
And finally, a productivity tip that helps you to get more done.
Exactly the way the Code of Jewish Law begins, rise very early.
Okay. So how can people connect with you, learn more about your work, benefit from all the wisdom that you've accumulated and shared over the years?
I would love to. My website is rabbidaniellapin.com, rabbidaniellapin.com, Lapin. And my weekly podcast is the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show. It's also a long-form podcast, and it's available wherever you go to hear your podcasts.
Awesome. Well, I've learned a lot, and I've enjoyed the conversation, the back and forth, the intellectual and philosophical, interaction, so to speak. Leave us, please, with one final life lesson, something we haven't yet hit on that would put a really nice end to our conversation.
Learn to love people. Don't accept the idea that you might be an introvert. Somebody who breaks a leg doesn't from then on walk around saying, hey, I'm a broken leg guy. You go to an orthopedic surgeon, you get it fixed up. Being an introvert is not a normal state of affairs. It's being handicapped. And like most other handicaps, you can overcome it and get past it. And this is valuable not only for business, it's very valuable for business, it's very valuable for romance, it's very valuable for social life. It's valuable for even for our relationship with God. Teach yourself to love people.
If you don't mind, before we wrap up, because I identify as an introvert also, clarify for the audience, please, what you mean by introvert is something to overcome, as opposed to, let's say, being a person's sort of state of being. Because I'm sure you meant in terms of not being in your corner, not interacting, not being sociable. Clarify, please, what you were saying.
If you find yourself in general more interested in spending time alone or with maybe, one or two regular friends, but if you resist the opportunity of social interaction, you don't find yourself taking the initiative in outreach to people, whether it's at synagogue or church, or whether it's at social groups or sporting events, or wherever it is, then you are handicapped, and you are not overwhelmed by a genuine and irrepressible love of other people. And I'm not saying there should be nobody you hate. I mean, there are horrible people out there, but in general, in our circuit, and yes, it's okay. I mean, many of us need to regenerate in quiet circumstances, but missing an opportunity, allowing an occasion to meet new people to slip by without seizing that opportunity, means you're doing something wrong. That's not a state of being. That is, we were created to connect. That's how God created us. The very, very first time that God is unhappy about anything is when he says it's not good for man to be alone. And that's not just a prescription for Adam's matrimonial prospects. It's a generalized statement that isolation and loneliness are very, very destructive. And carrying.
Well, yeah. No, we're living, especially our youth, I think, are lonelier than ever, more interconnected, social media and all that. But in terms of
for
real
heaven's sake,
relationships,
let it be said. I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is so important.
Yeah.
5,000 friends on Facebook is not worth 5 customers or 5 friends.
Correct. Yeah, that's an important point.
That's what you were saying.
So we feel we're connected, but practically there's more loneliness, there's more depression out there because of the fact that we're substituting genuine fake superficial relationships and likes and things like that for the real thing.
That is so true.
So that's a very powerful point. And thank you for helping us end with that very strong awareness. It's been a pleasure. Like you said before we started talking, I don't know why we haven't met each other until now.
I know, it's strange.
But I've enjoyed the conversation immensely, learned a tremendous
Likewise,
amount.
I very much. I want to meet you.
Yeah, hopefully we will. Hopefully we will. So I want to wish you, since we record on a Friday, a Shabbat Shalom.
Yes.
And it will not probably post until somewhere in the holiday season. I'm not exactly sure where. So we may not get this out until after people have experienced the high holidays. But regardless, you should have a kesiva v'chasima tova. You should have a healthy and blessed new year, and to be inscribed in the book of life. And God willing, we should find opportunities to connect again in the near future.
Amen to that. And the same to you. All good wishes and blessings.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode and for investing in yourself so that you can lead to succeed. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback gives the show more social proof and encourages more folks to listen.